Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Training for Mountaineering webinar. My name is Mary Brown, and I'm the Guide Manager here at Alpine Ascents International. I'm streaming in from our world headquarters on the unceded traditional lands of the Coast Salish people, including the Duwamish people, past and present. While I'm introducing our esteemed speaker, please drop your name in the chat, where you're joining from, and what you're training for. Today, we'll be learning from Alpine Ascents Senior Guide and Certified Strength and Conditioning Coach, Lyra Pierotti. Whenever I spend a day in the mountains with Lyra, I always leave with tips to take my training and fitness to the next level. Lyra started her career as a mountain guide in California's High Sierra Nevada, guiding numerous peaks and rock climbs from Yosemite Valley to the High Sierra before venturing into the complex and beautiful North Cascades. In addition to seeking technical guiding certifications, she started her study as a fitness professional, becoming a certified strength and conditioning specialist, pursuing further studies of movement mechanics in the female physiology. Lyra now operates her own small personal training company called Momentum, and enjoys the opportunity to help take her clients take their fitness to the next level. Before I turn this webinar over to Lyra, just a couple of housekeeping notes. If you have any questions during the presentation, please pop them in the Q&A box, and we'll circle back to them at the end of the webinar. I'm going to turn off my camera in a second, but I'll be in the chat dropping in helpful tips throughout the presentation. In addition to helping me moderate the chat, we have Tara Fraga, our program coordinator, an elite ultra runner. She has the FKTs on Glacier Peak, Adams, Olympus, and El Dorado. She's very impressive. Well, without further ado, Lyra, over to you.
Everyone, I'm Lyra. I'm going to share my screen here and start with a little bit of an interactive activity. That'll take a moment. Stand by. There we go. Okay, so the way this works is you've got a question there. Go to, on your phone, desktop, whatever you have handy, go to menti.com and plug in that code, those 8 digits, and plug in one word, short phrase for what you consider training for mountaineering to be all about. And when you submit your answer, we'll start seeing a word cloud appear here. So we'll take, hey, ooh, good start. Awesome. Mental, nice, love it. I actually have no idea how many of you there are out there, so this is going to be awesome. Yeah. Type 2 fun, love it. Goals, mindset, resilience. Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of combination of like physical fortitude, but also some serious mental, and that's pretty spot on. Awesome. I'll keep going here. We'll have a rough idea of how many of you there are out there here. Consistency. I like that one a lot. I'll actually talk quite a bit about that. Nice. Whoever put that one in, thank you for that. That is, yeah, I'm gonna dive into that a lot. I'm seeing a couple in the chat. Tara and Mary will be monitoring the chat. We won't be super on it. So if we miss you, our apologies. There will be a Q&A, and there's a question and answer function. If you want to be sure your question gets answered at the end of the session here, make sure that you get it in that Q&A box. Cool. Awesome. Okay. Zone 2 training. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about that. Resilience, mind game, confidence, leg work. Yes. Yeah. So the sport specific side of these things. Hard work, suffering. Totally. Okay. I'm going to jump onto a lot of long slogs. Love it. Okay, next one. It'll pop up automatically on your screen. What fears or anxieties do you have about training? Short sentences will be, oh, yep, there you go. Oh, wow, whoa. All the same there. Got it. I'm not strong enough, balancing, demanding job. Yeah. Oof, some grim. Yeah. Yeah, this is a high risk activity, right? That's not, a lot of you touched on the mental side of it in that first question. And that mental side connects directly to, yeah, the risks can be real. These will start scrolling here in a minute. Never enough. Oh, totally. The mountain is always bigger. Lack of strength, overuse, great. Bad weather. Well, that one, unfortunately, we won't have a lot to tackle in this training webinar, but we can make sure you're ready. As we like to say, put yourself in a position to be lucky with good training. And this should start scrolling here. Oh, I guess I have to scroll it. Under an overtraining time, slow is okay. So long as we have consistency from that first slide. Commitment. Preparedness, absolutely. A lot of overlap. Yeah, so y'all are seeing a lot of you are coming into these climbs with very, very similar concerns and stressors. Rheumatoid arthritis, yeah, loss of joint pain. Gosh, we all are coming in, or some coming in with more challenges for sure. Nice. Great. Well, we're going to talk a lot about calibrating your training for yourself and checking in, some metrics to check in on your progress so that you can have some answers, at least for yourself, because training is so personal. Fear of heights, yeah, that's real. Yeah, a lot of overlap there. All right. Let me go ahead and bring up this other slide. Oops, hold on. Okay. All right, so this is a bit of our roadmap for our conversations this evening. I'm going to talk a bit about just the foundations of training, dive into the sport specificity and performance training just a little bit. There are many avenues you can go down in all the mountain sports, but I'll give you a couple of insights for the majority that captures the majority of our programming. Setting goals, we'll talk about some next steps, and then we'll save some time for questions, probably 15 or 20 minutes or so. Strongly recommend, if you can all, this is being recorded, so you can come back to it, but I would recommend taking notes. You'll see a framework. You might catch some catchphrases that you want to dive into more. You might have some questions. You're welcome to reach out after this. Screenshots, take a photo, whatever you like. So at the core, training for mountaineering is really more of a lifestyle than a sport with a periodized training schedule. Something I've noticed in the 15 years that I've been guiding now is that the folks that show up having some sort of fitness habit all year round find it a little easier to adapt that into this new endeavor. So keeping healthy, keeping strong, even if it's tangential sports in the off season, that can be balancing and rejuvenating and helpful for de-stressing from a high stress sport for sure. But making fitness and training a part of your lifestyle is critical. That has to do with carving out the time for training and keeping core strength. It's always easier to maintain than it is to build up. So we're not looking at so much, the challenge with training for mountaineering is a lot of the literature in the media that we might read about comes from things like baseball and football and very strong basketball, really strong sports with a lot of funding. This is not a sport with a lot of funding. So, and it is a skill sport as well. So it's an endurance sport added with a lot of technical know-how required. So here's our first activity. This comes from the now legendary Dr. Phil Maffetone. Many of you have probably heard of him at this point. Phil Maffetone first came into my awareness well over a decade ago. I was a climbing guide in Yosemite and living in the Eastern Sierra of California. And this older gentleman with this bright blonde hair showed up, sleeping in the back of his van at the neighbor who happened to be a professional climber. That was kind of the world that I was living in there. And he had on his tailgate a dozen eggs, raw eggs, and a really thick yellow book. And I'll never forget it. And I walked over and I said hi, and he just started talking my ear off about nutrition and training for endurance and matching your nutrition strategies to your endurance and aerobic training. Flash forward about a year, and his name was Surfer Bob. He free soloed the rostrum, if that's anything that any of you know. So he climbed without ropes by himself, a climb that was groundbreaking, a feat that was groundbreaking by Peter Croft in, I think, the 80s. So super high level, and he was just Surfer Bob. I mean, very fit, older gentleman, very skilled. That whole year leading up to it, I kept seeing him cycling around Yosemite Valley and climbing various things. And so when I heard that he had done that climb, I was like, oh, he was getting after something. Got it. At the time, I think he was in his 50s. So that was cool to see. Flash forward a bunch more years, and I'm starting to study training literature a little bit more as I'm aging as a mountain guide, and trying to become myself more intelligent about my training. And this big yellow book shows up in my library, and it's Dr. Phil Maffetone's, and it clicks that was the yellow book that was sitting on his tailgate. So Dr. Phil Maffetone's been around for a long time, and he's been gaining traction just recently in mountaineering training and literature for his work in acknowledging that your aerobic fitness really needs to be built on a foundation of health, and has helped many athletes come back from retirement as triathletes to have personal bests. So this is the core of his work, and hopefully as I'm talking here, y'all are managing to pull off this calculation. Take this number forward. It's going to be much lower than you think. Stick with it. When I went through this process, I had to go I think on my runs, I was going at a shockingly slow pace. I felt like I was almost walking. And in 5 months, I was back up to, oh gosh, like where I wanted to be and where I thought I should be in my running pacing at that same low heart rate though. So my heart rate and the ease with which I was running was now at a level of sustainability that became in those years of work an unshakable aerobic base, which for me as a sprint athlete at the core, I had never really felt. I'd always just toughed it out. But that my body finally learned how to be a really efficient aerobic athlete, and that was really exciting. So this number, take it with you. Let me now transition to the test. So this number, then it gives you something to check in on as much as monthly. That's great if you can pull that off. And here's the test. You select whatever your sport might be. Often people choose running, but you really can do anything. If running's not accessible for you, that is not a deal breaker for mountaineering. You can choose steep hiking, really critical in the next component here to choose your terrain carefully. It needs to be even to run this test, even or like regular and the same as close to the same as possible all the time. So stair steppers and treadmills do work really well, though uninspiring, perhaps. Choose your terrain, keep it, as I said, regular, consistent. Great if this is sport specific, but things like rowing and cycling do work, because really what we're trying to get at is your aerobic engine. And then choose your time. You could go longer than 30, but that starts to get pretty brutal to repeat. Keep it accessible so that you're likely to repeat it more often. Remember that you need at least 15 minutes going into this to warm up, and then give yourself another 15 to cool down. So a 30-minute test is going to take you an hour easy. Then set your timer, watch your heart rate, and do not go over that MAF heart rate that you just calculated. for the entire 30 minutes, but this is important, stay within 10 beats per minute. It takes some practice to really nail it. You'll probably kind of get the first test or two a little weird. The other thing I love about this is that it trains you also to the feeling of really consistent pacing, and that's a skill in mountaineering sports that is invaluable. Okay, next foundation of training here is durability. Durability is best considered an equation where you add mobility and stability. Mobility is essentially your ranges of motion that you own, that you're able to use. And your stability keeps you in those ranges of motion. So stability is best tackled with strength training. But we need to make sure that our joints are operating in a healthy range and in a full range. And when they do that, our bodies are more efficient and balanced. And in particular with endurance activities, they find that elastic energy, even in a walking gait. When you have really balanced muscles and healthy tendons and healthy tissues, a walking gait is something that just propels forward in a way that's really unique. Humans have an amazing design for walking specifically. So working on that is really important. There are many ways to dive into this. I certainly cannot recommend for a whole webinar full of people, but the approaches can include things like yoga. For me, as someone who has a lot of mobility naturally, yoga tends to be too much and I don't really do much of it. Instead, I do really targeted mobility and much more strength training to make sure that I'm more stable. So with that, everyone's going to fall a little bit differently on needs. Are you going to need more mobility if you run a little bit tighter? Or are you going to need more stability because you tend to be a little more supple or loose in your joints? It really just depends on the person and the makeup. Targeted foam rolling can be a really good approach. If done wrong, it can also be a little either potentially a waste of time. It can also be a little dangerous, I will say. So a general guideline with foam rolling is that it's not something you want to do as a warm-up, and it's only something you want to do after workouts. And that will be very protective if you remember that. And then massage is a great thing. Make that a habit, especially as you're ramping up your training for your upcoming objective. That's super important. Consider that an investment in your future. Things like Qigong, similar to yoga, has a great, that's a little less geared towards what we consider flexibility, like a lot of yoga practices, but really good for the joints, moves your joints through a lot of ranges of motion, and great for your tissues, balance, core strength, because it's a slow movement. And then of course, seeking out a personal trainer or a coach of some sort to help you target your mobility practice. You can learn a lot in a short amount of time and figure out what your body needs and then carry that forward. Now, here's where we get into mountaineering. Mountain sports are skill sports. They're a type of sport that if you stick around, you can keep getting better for a while, at least, so long as you stay healthy. Something I think a lot about in the longevity component is very different sport, but related, that quarterbacks, if they stay, quarterbacks tend to be older. And one of the reasons they say is because that is such a skilled position on the football field that they get better and smarter over time. And fortunately, they're a little more protected from all of the tackling. So can be little less rough on the body. And if they stay healthy and they persist and they learn the plays and they learn their teammates and They can keep getting better, and some of the best ones have been in their early 40s. And then my other favorite story is Dina Castor, who, oh gosh, if I remember the exact details, she was one that I used to see running along with Meb Keflezighi when I lived in Mammoth. I would see the two of them running around. That was when the Mammoth Track Club was still active as a high altitude, more or less higher elevation training center, really perfect roads at 7,000 feet for them to run on, and you'd see them running all around. Meb Keflezighi won the Boston Marathon at age 38. And Dina Castor, I remember seeing her little one, her child running around at some point. And then some years later, I believe she was in her early 40s also, she PR'd in her race, which is the 10K. So those were cool little things that have really stuck with me over the time. You stay with it. Endurance sports are also very mental in a way, because your brain learns to really be efficient, and it's impressive. And I'm not sure that we can really cognitively explain what is happening, but our movement gets smarter as we persist and stay healthy. So here, this I could have an entire webinar on, by all means. One of the big things that I've been working with in the last year is the female hormones, and using that as a sort of ergogenic aid. And a lot of research is coming out to support women in training, because so much of the literature was not written with women studied at the center of it. And it turns out it's quite different. So those hormonal patterns can be used in a way that drives incredible efficiency and power in your training, and gives you the strategies to target that training. This app, wild.ai for artificial intelligence, comes from Dr. Stacy Sims, who is an American, but studying and researching in New Zealand, former professional triathlete, and leading the charge on this research. And it's groundbreaking and exciting and empowering. If you change just one thing, consuming 20 to 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of your workouts is critical for the female physiology. Dr. Stacy Sims has a great website, and this app as well I would start with that. It's really fantastic. And if you really like reading about training, she also has a couple of books out there as well. Supporting your health. I'm sure these are things that you've heard harped on endlessly. I have a few little tweaks to maybe the dominant paradigms that we hear. Certainly eating well. There's not a lot of dogma around that. Really just whole foods, eating enough is really critical, especially in going back to the female physiology. It is very common for women not to eat enough in training, and even just in daily life. So really eating enough is crucial, especially as you ramp up your training. Sleeping plenty. I know we all say it, and I'm sure very few of us really tend to it as well as we should. But this is the core of your recovery. There's a magnificent book called Good to Go, The Science of Recovery, written by Christine Eschwanden. Again, that's Good to Go, and it's a great audiobook as well. She goes through a lot of the dominant recovery hype, I would say, and as a former scientist herself, develops a plan that she essentially wanted to prove that beer was a great recovery drink, and then comically drops that and goes into writing about all of the things that are put forward as recovery aids. And the one, spoiler alert, sorry, still read the book, it's awesome. But the one that shakes out is sleep across the board. It is absolutely getting enough sleep. Minimizing your stress. That can take many forms. That can include spending time in nature where you're not goal oriented. So if you're finding that your only time in nature is like when you're going on your training hikes, but you are still feeling stressed, consider adding just time, undirected time in nature. That ties in as well here to heart rate variability. This is a great metric. There are many wearables that can help you measure this. Watches don't work. The sensors are not yet good enough. So keep that in mind. Read through. There are a number of apps out there that offer this. Some of the literature is changing on it. The Aura Ring is taking this throughout the day, which is quite cool. And that's the literature is moving toward, or the research is moving towards that for the best understanding. But the heart rate variability is something that has been shown to pick up on things like overtraining much sooner than older ways of detecting overtraining, such as elevations in resting heart rate. The heart rate variability, it senses the change in your nervous system from parasympathetic to sympathetic and how you toggle between the two. And that occurs even in your breath as you breathe in and out. And it's a great tool. And it's very personalized. Your numbers don't necessarily directly correlate to or compare to others, but it's a really valuable one. So those are some things to consider. Heart rate variability. I know a number of folks who have improved things like sleep and training and food, and then found themselves stagnant with their heart rate variability. And they're like, something's not quite right. Like I still feel kind of off. And they added easy walks in nature and saw significant improvements in their heart rate variability and their overall stress. The mental and physical challenges of mountaineering certainly warrant having a strong plan for stress management and coming in with as little as you can. A few more ideas. And as I see the chat kind of going off here, I'm not really reading those, but feel free to throw some ideas in the chat for all of your strategies in making training a lifestyle. I certainly completely muddle my training with at least like the easy and long days with all of my friends. Like that's a really fun way to have friend visits and, you know, go see new places I'm excited about and just really build that into all of the things I enjoy in life. And then other things, bring your family into it. I love hearing about families that, you know, tow their kids in sleds, or like more and more we get parents training with their teenagers coming out for climbs and the cool things they can do together with them. My mother lives in Italy and I just spent a couple weeks over there, and she and I are very similar, but also very different. She's a musician and a violin teacher, or was in her career, and a concert violinist, and lives more of the artist and creative lifestyle, very passionate about what she does. Like the thing I'm passionate about ended up being a very different lifestyle, but we really get each other. And so I thought, gosh, what's a good way? I don't get to see my mom as much as I would like these days, but she's so psyched living her dream. And I was like, I wonder how we could put this together. Well, it turns out public transit to skiing in Italy is a thing. And so we went to this really cool town in the Dolomites, low elevation enough that she could spend the whole day exploring this beautiful city. And I would jump on the train or the bus and I'd go skiing all day. And then she'd have like the coolest museum and dinner planned for the afternoon when I got back. So that was that was a life highlight for sure. So think of things you can do like that, where you're tending to your training needs, but also bringing in the lifestyle of the people around you that help to make it sustainable, and then also acknowledges the things that they want and need to be doing. Okay. Let's now dive into a little bit of specifics of the sports at hand. And largely what I'm going to describe speaks to general mountaineering. So not necessarily ice climbing, rock climbing, or alpine climbing. lots to talk about in those, but you'll get a general concept here. So leg strength for mountaineering. There is, if you're following the Alpine Ascents blog, I wrote a blog within the last month that includes a video as well with some basics on training your legs for mountaineering. A really important thing that I think goes missed with a lot of people in training is to separate strength training from what I'm going to talk about a little later, muscular endurance. So what that means, time in the gym is really valuable in a weight gym. Getting your leg strength solely from carrying heavy backpacks puts a great toll on your spine. So it's important to separate the two and drive really powerful leg strength gains without putting that strain and stress on your spine. Save that work for what we're going to talk about in muscular endurance. These are some parameters for strengthening your legs for mountaineering specifically. These are outlined in that blog. And the important thing here, training healthy mechanics, that gets to mobility. Mobility is going to help that a lot, as well as your strength training. And here you'll see lift heavy, 2 to 6 RM. That's reps max. So that's jargon for the strength training world. What on earth does that mean? The other way of saying it is 80% of your 1 rep max. It's much simpler than it looks. The shorthand's really easy to write. What this means is you want to lift something that is heavy enough that you cannot complete more than 2 or 6 repetitions before failing. And I put failing in quotes because you do not want to be literally like torquing your body and falling apart and damaging your posture and your form. This should be to form failure. And form failure can be the slightest change or dip, like anything you perceive as a change in your form. Your best method is to call that the end and just end right there. You'll notice that this is not the classic like 10 to 12 reps. More is not better. 10 to 12 repetitions is a type of training that is called hypertrophy. What that means is it builds muscle. If you are brand new to strength training, spend some time with that. That's going to build up bulky muscle, and you need that to support your new strength training habit. So that is a worthwhile phase. If you're already there and you have the muscle that you want to work with, this protocol, this 80% of the 1 rep max, this is the protocol that finds that sweet spot between it doesn't build bulky muscle, but instead it drives excellent neurological control and efficiency. So, little detail there that I think a lot of goes missed often. And I think if you integrate just one thing from this in your strength training, if you do that, I imagine you'll notice some great changes. Include eccentric exercises. So eccentric exercises are where your muscle is loaded while it is stretching. So concentric would be the classic curl for your bicep muscle, lowering that weight where your bicep is stretching with that load. That is the eccentric phase. So concentric for your bicep, eccentric for your bicep. If you're climbing Tacoma, Mount Rainier, with us in 3 days, that 3rd day, we go downhill 9,000 feet. That's a lot. The first few climbs, my legs are sore. That's heinous. And I always think that I come into this thing strong, but when I come in the springtime, I've been skiing all winter. Not quite the same thing. So this gets me every year. I plan to see my massage therapist to help me get unsore. Have your self-care plan in place. 9,000 feet downhill is brutal. This will light up your quads and you'll need to foam roll those quads. Take care of those quads. Include eccentric exercises in your training. This would be box step overs, for example, and this is in that blog, if you find my blog. This is box step overs rather than box step up and back, up and back. The up and over is going to be more sport specific for mountaineering. And this last one, recover intentionally. That'll be a theme you'll hear me keep harping on. Okay, the backpack. Again, this could be its own webinar, I think, but here's a good start, hopefully, to give you something to move forward with. First, again, harping on the mobility, establish a good routine to help you recover. Throwing a heavy pack on your back is going to make things stiffen. Really, tend to the fit of this pack. Make sure it's a good one for you. These things are really worth time. The pack can be the to blame for a lot of strange injuries and imbalances, and it's just not worth it. I also strongly recommend packing your actual kit, like the stuff you're actually going to carry. Maybe you won't have like all of your food and all of your layers. Find things like proximal to that, like maybe a blanket, something that's similar to your bag of food, but avoid, I'm sure you read a lot about this and I feel very differently about it, loading your pack up with things like dumbbells, jugs of water, sandbags. They load your packs really awkwardly. When I try to do that, because it's in the dominant training literature of the little bit that we do have for mountaineering, it hurts my back. When I load my actual gear, it's better. It's not great, but it's a lot better. The added benefit here is you're going to get a lot of practice packing your gear, and that is then going to become something you stress less about. You don't have to think so much about. Strategy is a huge part of mountaineering, and those details, showing up with those details well rehearsed, can allow you to enjoy the experience more and can just like really diffuse your stress levels. So think of all those details that are within your power to practice, even if they seem silly. It's not silly. A lot of recommendations for pack carries that I've read as well say to dump water out. So do water jug carries and then dump the water out to save your knees. For some of you, this may be necessary. If that is necessary, I advocate for diving into why those knees are hurting. And there may be some things you can do about it. For some of you, there may not be. And you want to just minimize and save your knees for the event. But for many of you, if you're having knee pain, it can be as simple as knots in your quads. That is very common. Seek out massage therapists. Again, we'll talk a little more about that, but really tend to that and try to heal your knees instead. Allow them to tolerate that activity. Now, the next little bit here comes from some of my observations and curiosities around what guides do, what works, what they get away with. We do these things year round, and often it can be simply that we're used to them, not necessarily that, and get away with it, and our bodies take a toll for it also. But as we get older, we learn to balance ourselves out and become efficient at these things as older adults that can't tolerate the shenanigans of our youth anymore. So something that guides do, we carry packs all year round, probably 20 pounds or so, like all year round on almost all of our activities. Backcountry skiing, ski patrolling in the winter, spring mountaineering, that's when things get real. That's when you're throwing on the like 70-pound pack on expeditions. All summer long, we'll have multi-day trips where you might have a day or two of exceedingly heavy packs, but then you have several days of lighter packs. Think through specifically what your climb is going to require and mimic that. As you start to ramp up several months before your climb, start adding in those absurdly heavy, within range, what you are supposed to be carrying, whatever your literature says for your climb. Start adding those in. Make sure that you have protocols for yourself to get yourself loosened up or relaxed after those. Give yourself the time after those backpack carries, usually the day after. You want to program for yourself something to mobilize, relax, and tend to any of those really small back muscles that might be sore. Ultimately, you're going to ramp up a good guideline for heavy carries is about 30% of your body weight. For those of us who are a little bit smaller, unfortunately, that can end up being a little more than, or a lot more than 30% at times. Mountaineering gear is just kind of heavy and rough that way, but you can absolutely train for it. And I'll go back to, again, separating that leg strength out without the wear and tear of your backpack is going to help set you up for success. With absurdly strong legs, you're just going to have to be tending to the trouble, the weirdness, the weight, the discomfort of the pack. You'll have more ability to focus on what's going on with the backpack if you have less concern elsewhere. And one of those things is if your legs are just really, really strong. Core strength, I didn't mention that yet. Core strength is also going to help you with your posture. So a well-fit backpack, a well-packed backpack. We have literature on that for you, blog posts and videos in your course materials or your climb materials. Your core strength is also going to help you hold that thing up a little bit better. Okay, a little more here. What about once we have a really solid base and we are super strong, start with those. So the first phases for a month or two of your training should include really basic aerobic foundations and strength training. Those two are an excellent place to start. Then, when you've got a good aerobic foundation, that means that your heart is working really efficiently. That's going to give you a more capacity to recover, to bounce back from your exercise and do it again the next day. You have to have that before you dive into high intensity interval training. I'm going to say that again because it's exceedingly important, and I see people fail on climbs because they don't grasp that. Things like CrossFit, Orange Theory, they can be really great supplements to your training for mountaineering. They are not in any way a replacement for the hours and hours that must be spent on your base level aerobic training. There is no replacement for that. Many years ago, the famous extreme sport endurance athlete Mark Twight wrote about this, realizing it the hard way, that finally they thought, oh, there's this secret way that we can circumvent all the hours that we need to spend for this base aerobic fitness with circuits and things like CrossFit. And it didn't work, it backfired. So it can be a great supplement. Absolutely can give you a little more gas in the tank. It can make you feel really good. Strongly recommend it. You must first have an exceedingly strong base aerobic fitness level. Hopefully that's clear. And if it's not, I'm happy to take questions about that as well. When you have that, then you're in a position to start doing intervals. If you read about this from Dr. Phil Maffetone, he advocates even more strictly than I think I do. He says that your intervals should only come at a point where you've done that MAF heart rate practice so well that you can't move your limbs fast enough to get your heart rate to stay in that zone. Like your heart has gotten so efficient that you're having to really run hard. Now your peripheral limbs are challenged in speed to push your heart rate, if that makes sense. So that's how he describes intervals. He calls them aerobic intervals. That is an awesome place to be if you can be. Different schools of thought on how strict one should be in that. But whichever route you choose, whichever route works for you, coming back to that MAF test on a monthly basis, ensuring that you are making small gains and certainly not reversing in your pacing that you're testing, that will help give you the picture. If you're going back and you're losing that base fitness, you're becoming slower at that same heart rate, something's not working for you. So start investigating. But if it's going well, adding in some high intensity, some hit or sit sprint interval training can be really fantastic. And again, sport specific. Hill pyramids, intuitive intervals. This is one that can be really fun and interactive, where if you're running in hilly terrain, you might push yourself and you'd look at a certain tree and say, okay, I'm going to keep going fast until that tree, and then I'll take a break. And then you walk and recover, and you kind of play a game with yourself and say, okay, when I pass that rock, I'm going to run again. So it is a way for you, your intuition to guide your exertion levels, but also some landmarks to hold you accountable. So that strikes a really good balance. I like that one a lot. Hill pyramids are just simply where you go uphill for a minute and then walk back down. You go uphill for 2 minutes, walk back down, uphill for 3 minutes, and walk back down. Track sprints, some people really love those. They can be super fun. Sprint intervals could just be 100 meters. Those can give your legs a lot of power. And going longer can be really great as well. 400, even 800 meter can be really beneficial. Now, muscular endurance, what is that? It is simply where you are not limited by your heart rate, but rather by that burn in your legs or your limbs, whatever you might be doing. This is a really common one to work with climbing endurance in the gym, where you get a light pump in your forearm, but you're able to continue climbing. That builds the aerobic capacity of your forearms very, very well. So that's all those are all types of muscular endurance. That is your local muscles capacity to do work. For this one, this is where backpack carries come into play. So a couple of months before your training, before your event, adding in some of these workouts. 1 a week is usually good, maybe 2. Focus more on strength training than these workouts. Always more on strength training, and the primary in hours being aerobic. But this one is really great for your backpack carries. So you can load, if you find that you're not super challenged by the load that you're packing your pack, and it is up to the standard for your climb, seek steeper terrain. Head out to the stair stepper. Some people have used treadmills on really like the highest incline. So make that terrain steeper until you get that leg burn, or make the pack heavier, or both. Okay. So here is a workshop for all of you. Jot these down as I go through them. And this will give you something to help your next steps with whatever objective you have coming up. And you can also just write down the sequence of events here if you want to take some time and think about it. So first is your outcome goal. For many of you, this is probably the climb that you have signed up for, but it could be beyond that. This could be something that's in line with some future goals, some bigger even than that. Some of those future goals could be more general as well, which as you imagine, I'm advocating this as a lifestyle sport. Perhaps that outcome goal is to find longevity in this activity, to find your health and fitness and a balanced approach to training so that you can keep coming back to this thing year after year. Performance goals. These are measurable. You can compare them to your previous performance, and they're up to you on what that measure is. So what do you want to be able to do with your athleticism? Process. This becomes really targeted to specific skills, perhaps behaviors, actions. So what in your training do you want to see change in order to facilitate your performance, your outcome. Get really specific with these. Make sure that they're actionable. That specificity will help you keep yourself accountable. Motivations. Making a list of these can really help. So keeping a few on hand. It is very normal to wane in your motivation at times. It is often most important simply to listen to that and figure out if there's a pattern to it and give yourself the rest. Perhaps your body is asking for rest. But perhaps it is just like, wow, like you live really far from the mountains. It can be really hard to stay inspired by this thing that does inspire you, but the lift to get there is a little bit more. So what keeps you motivated? What are the things that keep you going? Is it a photo perfectly placed in your house or your office? Is it a training partner? Is it a monthly hike in the state next door where you have better terrain and it takes, some travel time, but maybe it's worth going somewhere for a long weekend where you do have the terrain that you want to train in. And then list your fears, your doubts, and your concerns in training. We discussed a little bit of those to start the day, and many of them were the same, as you all saw. And then draft some strategies to overcome these. And accountability buddies will help you with those strategies. Okay, your next steps. Avoiding common pitfalls. There are a few that are really quite simple to tackle. Certainly, some of you may want to work with a professional to help direct your training, but some of you may just be able to start drafting your own training program. Polarizing your training is one of the best things that you can do. So what that means, the reason it's a common pitfall is that we find most of the time when people are kind of training, but not really organizing their training or being directive with it. The most common error is that people go too hard on their easy days and too easy on their hard days. So really separating those two is really powerful. Easy work done consistently. That's the important part. Showing up for it consistently is really, really good work. The workout that doesn't feel like a workout is one of the best things that you can do for your aerobic engine. Mix things up, change, keep things dynamic. Doing the same strength training type for all of the time can be a good way to see progress, and then you can become stagnant and fixed in certain movement patterns. So mix it up, change things, keep it fresh. Try something new as well throughout your training. If you are struggling, again, getting back to that motivation, if you're far from the mountains, try something really different. Perhaps like something really wild, like salsa dancing once a week for a little while. That can be really good for your lower leg quickness and your calf muscles, things like that, your coordination, your balance, and it can get your heart rate up. So get creative, stay sport specific, of course, but mix it up. Consider other things that can help keep everything fresh and fun and keep you moving forward in your goals. And listen to your body. So lots of metrics, lots of wearables out there. Be a little bit wary of relying on them too much. If you read the, not disclaimers, but a lot of the watches that give you your recovery information or your body battery and those kinds of things, it's really cool. It's really interesting. They're designed to be motivating for fitness. They're not designed to be spot on for the individual. Watch it and see how it relates to what you feel. And it can be just a fun thing to get a little two-way dialogue on with this device that's paying attention. And some of them are quite good. When you do get a good monitor for heart rate variability, a good sensor for heart rate variability, that is really good data. Just your heart rate, just your resting heart rate is really valuable to watch over time. And that's reliable with all kinds of watches that you might use. The wild.ai app, strongly recommend. That will collect a variety of subjective and objective metrics, things that you report, as well as things that if you have a wearable, it will record, such as your sleep, your resting heart rate. Those are quite cool. Or that app is really quite cool. And then you report some things like the way you're feeling that are backed by a lot of research. In fact, those subjective measures can be quite powerful. So logging these things over time, as you can see, super valuable. And that gets to my next bullet point here: plan your training and your plan for adapting it. So any number of professionals out there can draft a plan for you that says do this and then do this and then do this and then do this. But it doesn't necessarily respond to how you feel in a certain day. And if you miss something, it doesn't help you calibrate how to make up for that. Your plan should include a plan for adjusting and adapting based on how you feel, based on how you're recovering. More and more, so that wild.ai app gives you, based on the things you report, it gives you a short statement, a short phrase every morning that says, hey, this is where you're at. Try this type of training today. Or, oh, wow, like you only slept 4.5 hours. Let's scale it back today. And it helps to keep you honest, because pushing through at those times can do more damage than it can benefit your training. So adapting your training, reflecting on where you are, and responding to how you feel every day is the most important. That said, if you struggle with motivation and consistency, then you will need something to help you stay on it and push through those times. It is exceedingly important to spend the hours training for mountaineering, because it requires aerobic exercise like that requires it. Another general guideline, I didn't write this up here, but another general guideline is to spend 70 to 80% of your training hours in a week in a fully aerobic capacity. I'll say that again. 70 to 80% of your training hours per week should be spent in aerobic training. So that's hiking, running, cycling, everything to support that base aerobic fitness. It's that important. It requires a lot of hours. So as you are adapting your training, one of the things to keep an eye on is that you're able to show up consistently for training. So even if you end up just doing an easier training, that can be okay. Over time, if you're not pushing at all, then you're not going to make gains. But more important than that at the beginning is to make sure you're staying consistent. Even in strength training, research continues to support that lower level strength training, not like the 2 to 6 repetitions is really great, but you don't necessarily have to do like an hour and a half of training. If you go out for a half an hour of strength training, that's fantastic. If you're not sore the next day, that's also fantastic. Soreness does not mean you did it right. If anything, it's the opposite. That soreness reflects that you've damaged your muscles and they require recovery. If you are consistent and you're not making yourself sore, tired at times, but not sore, not like debilitating sore, then you will continue to make gains and then watch your progress over time. So that's the real mastery of all of this, is staying consistent, finding that zone where you're not pushing so hard that you're sore or you get injured, or even just get sick from pushing a little bit too much high intensity, for example, not enough aerobic. I see that push people into illness quite often. That yeah, that stress on your heart can detract from the whole training. Requires an immune response. And so if your training is taking too much of your immune response, you can become more susceptible to colds and viruses and things. So keep that training level adapting, driving your adaptation, not detracting from your health. Going back to that MAF test will help you keep on track with that. So then, all of that said, when do you need a pro to help guide you? I'm sure that you will know. If you need help with certain types of motivation, perhaps hiring a strength coach that can be with you a couple times a week in your hometown can be a really, really beneficial thing. Going to those classes at your gym can be really helpful. Absolutely find a good massage therapist and make that a practice. Structural integration, write that one down. Structural integration is a type of massage therapy that sits somewhere between massage therapy and physical therapy. There's a school for it in Seattle, so there's a number of practitioners locally. It is a magnificent practice that's really balancing for athletes, and it helps put our muscles into a balanced position so that our joints are better aligned, our posture is more supported, and our joint actions are more elastic and efficient. So really good one. Try that. Acupuncture, some people have great success with that for a variety of things. Physical therapy, really good to just be in touch with a good physical therapist. Have someone that you can go to if anything comes up. Better to go prophylactically, so preventively, rather than responding to something happening or struggling to find someone when something's an issue. Find someone that you trust and set yourself up. Consider this part of your self-care. I have a variety of folks and professionals that I see rotate through the year on a regular basis that my friends refer to as my staff. So again, treat yourself like a professional athlete. It's worth it. Cool. And then if you need help, of course, with your training plans, there are a number of pros out there. You're welcome to browse my website as well. And watch Alpine Ascents for any more offerings. And with that, you see the chat blowing up over here. How is I'll pull up the Q&A so I see what's going on.
Is it time for the Q&A session?
Already.
Oh my gosh. Lyra, what a great presentation. I took a bunch of notes. Now I'm ready to hopefully keep up with you on the skin track this winter.
You'll be breaking trail like usual, Mary.
Oh, I don't know. Hopefully. Where to start? We have a lot of questions about the MAF. We have a question from Greg. Is the MAF the same as your heart rate at your aerobic threshold? If you have completed a CPT and know your heart rate at the aerobic threshold, do you recommend exercising above or below to raise it?
Great question. You'd have to look and find out. That number I find can be quite different from various tests that people do in labs, and that's okay. The most important part is that you have a number you're working with and testing it over time and seeing if you're making progress. So you can be really dogmatic with that calculation that I had, and you can read about that in Dr. Phil Maffetone's book as well. I spent some time being really strict about it, and it was cool and worthwhile. And I think eventually it was helpful for me to open that up and go a little beyond it. So increase my heart rate, but it gave me a tool to assess myself and test myself over time. So I think the big thing in this is that kind of measurement puts that tool in your hands and keeps it really simple. If anything, I think the MAF heart rate is conservative. So hopefully that gives you something to.
Excellent. There's another question about it. What if you can go beyond your MAF for 30 minutes? Is that a good thing? Or do you want to be in that zone plus or minus 10, but increase the duration as you train?
Yeah, so that's getting into that common error where easy days are too hard and hard days are too easy. Super important to polarize your training. So if you've set that MAF number, and just as I was saying, it could be different, there could be some wiggle room, stick with it strictly and make sure that from 1 month to the next, you are improving. Once you have yourself improving, then start to tweak. If you can sustain that, a common, I think, misconception or a way to drive over training is to just try to go as hard as possible for as long as possible. If that is how you train, then you are going to feel like you're going hard all the time. So if you flip that around and you go into your training trying to make it as easy as possible, and you nail that MAF method is going to help with that. If you nail that, then all of your training is going to be easy. And so long as you're making gains, then you're going to show up with that heavy effort or that big effort, and the patterning in your habits, in your training, for that to feel easy. There's a variety of reasons for it. And a lot of it has to do that when you train at that sub-maximal level, it improves your posture, your core alignment, your breathing, and that allows you to improve your speed without dipping into immune response. One of the big things that helps with runners is when you have to go slower, you start to repair your gait mechanics. When you try to push for that 30 minutes, oftentimes you will be extending your gait a little too far, for example, and that can drive inflammation at the joints and gait mechanics that are unhealthy. All of those things summarize with an elevated heart rate, even just a little bit. And so then that comes back to why that conservatively low heart rate limit. Hopefully that connects
That
some
was a good
dots.
answer. Another question. Several times during the presentation, you mentioned if you have a good aerobic base or building on top of a good aerobic base, how do you know if you have a good aerobic base or not?
Great. Yeah. And again, similar answer here. So that's all wrapped up in this same protocol. That one tool to know that is if you are doing that test and from 1 month to the next, you continue to make gains, you certainly don't go backwards. At that point, I would put myself in comparable terrain to that which my event or my climb is going to require and see how it feels. We have literature for you to tell you how, what pace we expect as guides on your objective. And I think generally it's between 1,000 and 1,300 feet per minute with your pack weight. Mary, maybe you fact check me on that.
Yes, let me fact check you, not fact check you.
But that your climbing literature will, or your trip literature will give you a good sense for what the expectations are. It's going to tell you what your pack weight will be. It should outline in the itinerary what days you're going to have like sled carries or big, camp moves. And that will give you an idea of how to strategize and say, okay, this weekend, I know that for a DC climb on Tacoma Mount Rainier, we're going to have 2 days, 1 day, big day, heavy-ish pack, second day, lighter pack, big climb, third day, long downhill. So you can strategize your weekend workout and how heavy your pack carries are and how big your days are by mimic your climb. Mary, was I right?
Yes, it was 1,000 feet an hour.
1,000 feet an hour. I would build in a little reserve if you can. So yeah, but yeah, so we expect people to be moving minimum 1,000 feet an hour uphill with those heavy packs.
Perfect.
What
What about our friends in the flatlands? If you live in a flat area, what are some strategies for training for mountaineering?
You can do a lot with, stair steppers, treadmills, really like steeply angled. I had some folks come from Dubai having trained in massive skyscrapers, and they just went up, 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 up. Like their mental fortitude was phenomenal. They were so psyched to be in the mountains, as you can imagine, with the views that they had. They're like, "Whoa, this is so nice, so much easier, and I can see something." So they also needed the air conditioning, as I recall there. So you can make do with a lot. The challenges are in long duration sustained pacing, and that is something that's really hard to mimic without having long steep trails and like the value of that I think is tremendous. And I've often recommended that people travel, once a month if you can. The other piece of that then is also, if you are trying to do all of your training, most of your aerobic training on machines, you're going to be on flat surfaces, very predictable and regular surfaces. Your ankle stability, your footwork, your coordination will struggle when you get on uneven terrain. One way that I've seen work magnificently for a father-daughter pair actually on Mount Elbrus many years ago. They were training in Iowa and failed on their first attempt, came back the next year, and they mimicked everything they had learned in their time off. They went out on the burliest weather days they had in all of their gear. They put their crampons on, their boots and their crampons on, and they did cramponing footwork on the steep hillside in their backyard. Those kinds of things, silly as it might seem, can be fantastic. And if you don't have a lot of rough terrain, a hillside with boots and crampons and on grass can actually do wonders, because then you're standing at an angle and working those muscles or those calf muscles, those ankle stabilizers in a way that's very similar to what you'll be doing on snow.
Nice. In a similar vein, what about training for altitude at sea level?
Ooh, there is a book written that you could check out called The Oxygen. Author McEwen, I think. They talk about these breath hold techniques that can help at altitude. There is no replacement for time and experience in thin air. And your acclimation can be kind of inconsistent. You can have a whole career of doing excellent at altitude, and then this one trip where you're just like, wow, I feel just terrible. Mm-hmm. The best approaches are to have a very high level of fitness, practice with your fueling techniques, make sure that your food works well for you, ease into the altitude with climbs that like over your career. Really advisable to experiment. If you're working up to Denali, try some 14ers, see how you do there. Get up to 18 if you can before trying something like Denali to see how you do at a comparable altitude. So fueling can be important. And then something else I've found to be really helpful is working on your breathing mechanics. So some of that comes into mobility and massage therapy. Some of that can simply be making sure that your ribs are, the muscles, your intercostal muscles are operating well. When they get stuck and knotted up, then your lungs are not going to inflate as well, or your intercostal muscles might be working too hard. When your breathing requires more energy, which it will at altitude, you're going to literally have to be pumping your rib cage, your lungs more. Your intercostal muscles get fatigued, so the act of breathing takes more energy. Mm-hmm. So the more you can develop your core musculature, specifically your diaphragm strength, your breathing strength, and everything that's involved in that, that's really important. That ties into the reason that I'm so passionate about bringing mobility into your backpack carries. If you ignore that, that exacerbates any issues with your breathing. But if you really tackle it, you can keep your rib cage, your upper back, and everything mobile and operating well, so that the front of your rib cage, as well as the back of your rib cage, is inflating your entire lung capacity, and you're not getting a restricted. Backpacks will tend to restrict your ability to breathe into your back ribs. So a little bit of a tangential answer there, but
No, that was great. Switching gears to nutrition, how does food, protein versus carbs versus fat, fit into the recovery period after light versus heavy training sessions?
And I think I'm seeing what looks like a female name, so I'm going to answer that for specifically the female physiology. Hopefully that's appropriate. That is a great question, and there is a very clear answer for female athletes. Enough protein, more protein, and specifically within 30 minutes of exercising. That's hard and super important. What can help you absorb that protein in that 30 minutes is matching it really well to like the appropriate amino acids that are most easily absorbed into your muscles. And whey protein turns out to be a really good one for that. So if you're, do your research in terms of what you like with supplements and things like that. But getting a lot of protein in a very short amount of time after training, no matter what your training is, definitely strength training. That's the most important, but I would consider all training. That amount of protein is what's going to help build your muscles back. And it is very different. Male athletes have several hours post-training to build up their muscles that have been worked and and just beaten up during training. Female athletes only have 30 minutes, so that's a crucial thing to know. Other than that, with all the other macros, I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't want to speak out of turn. I think the most important thing from my perspective is usually more protein. Globally, for female athletes, more protein than probably anything you've got. It's absurd. And more calories. Generally, just getting enough food is important. Watch your blood sugar would be the next recommendation. Seek a balance of all of those things that's going to allow you to just feel even and energized.
Nice. And I did drop that cookbook you like, Eat, Train, and Win, in the chat so people know all about it. Yes. Okay, it's getting a little bit late, so let's just do a couple more questions. For those going to Denali, how do you train to pull a sled?
Yes. Yeah, mimic as much as you can. You can find, if you can. So actually one gentleman I trained for Denali was in Chicago, and he found a bunch of public land with rolling hills. He took his backpack, he connected figured out his way of connecting his backpack. He bought a little kiddie sled, poked holes in it, and dragged it around. So as sport specific as possible there is really great. Beaches could work, I imagine, something with a little, well, snow doesn't have a lot of friction, but yeah, mimicking, dragging.
Nice. Oh, excellent.
Yeah. Oh, there, some people might be familiar with like tire drags. Those can work, certainly.
Yeah, someone popped that in the chat. That sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, and then some gyms have sleds that usually are pushed, and they're probably a little heavier and more frictiony than you would experience on Denali. But
Mhm.
yeah, I'd say have fun with it and try to mimic as much as you can with a kiddie sled.
Okay. Okay, we'll do one final question. Last question of the day. What are your thoughts on weighted vests as opposed to backpacks for the backpack carry?
Yeah, my current opinion is that I'm not a huge fan.
Mhm.
They load you differently, and I think they put strain on your spine in a way that you might as well just not do that, but instead focus on leg strengthening in a gym. Spend that time instead with like Olympic weightlifting is, in my opinion, strangely, one of the best things you can do in your strength training, because the techniques of like throwing a barbell around in good form, please get coaching on this in person if you're new to it. But the alignment that's required to do that well is extremely supportive to your structure and can make your spine very strong. So I would throw that away, instead seek out coaching in Olympic weightlifting, and then stay sport specific with your specific backpack and carry that thing around. And even if it's a hassle, embrace that hassle, because that's going to come back to support you in your climb.
Nice.
Great
Lyra,
question.
thank you so much for taking the time to lead us through this webinar. It feels like it was just like a fire hose of information. I'm really excited to uh, stop the recording, let it do its thing in the cloud so I can rewatch it and take more notes.
And you know where to find me if you have more questions.
Yes, I know where to find you. For other people, I did drop Lyra's training company, Maffetone, in the chat. So be sure to check that out. Yeah, so this has been recorded. We'll pop it on the Alpine Ascents blog in a couple of days. We have another couple webinars coming up in February. Is it February yet? Like just in a couple days. We'll have one on the volcanoes, the Great Peaks of Bolivia, sort of mid-month, and then at the end of the month, Lyra will be leading another webinar all about Tahoma, also known as Rainier, about the itinerary, planning for the climb, an overview of the climb. So if you have questions about climbing that peak, be sure to tune in. It'll be great. Yeah, and I think that is all. Any final words, Lyra?
No, thanks for coming out, everyone. I'm stoked to see your interest and enthusiasm and dedication to it already. Your guides will be forever grateful for it as well.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so much. And I'll see you on the skin track.